The message came to Earth on a Tuesday morning in 2247. Commander Williams stood in the observation deck of the United Nations Space Station, looking at the alien transmission displayed on the massive screen before him. The words were translated by the station's best linguists, but the meaning was clear and direct. The Galactic Council invited humanity to compete in the Nexus trial, an obstacle course that no species had completed in 300 years. Read the message again. He was a man in his late 40s with dark hair turning gray at the temples. His face was weathered from years of military service and space missions. He had commanded 17 successful expeditions and survived 2 crashed ships. Failure was not something he accepted easily, but he was smart enough to recognize an impossible task when he saw one. Behind him, the door hissed open. Dr. Lisa Bradford entered, holding a data pad that glowed with information about the other competing species. She was younger than maybe 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent the last 10 years studying alien biology and had published papers that made her one of the most respected scientists in the Sol system. "Have you seen this?" Lisa asked, coming to stand beside him at the window. "Just received it," replied. "They're calling it a test of capability. I'm reading it as a test of how fast we fail." Lisa did not smile. She was not someone who made jokes about serious matters. They designed it. They believe they are superior to every other species in existence. This invitation is probably their way of proving humans are primitive. "Then why invite us at all?" asked. "Because we are new," Lisa said simply. "We are a curiosity. They want to demonstrate that even a young species cannot survive their trial." The door opened again. Officer Daniel Pierce walked in, followed by Nurse Hayes. Daniel was a military strategist who had spent 15 years analyzing combat patterns and developing tactical plans, was different from the others. She was a nurse, not a soldier or scientist. She had joined the space program to help, to heal, to support. People often underestimated her intelligence because of her gentle manner. They made a mistake when they did. "The council is meeting in 30 minutes, Daniel said. "They want a decision from us about whether to accept the challenge." Turned from the window, "What do you think, Daniel? Can we win?" "No," Daniel answered immediately. "The trial has been designed by the most advanced civilization in known space. It has been tested for 3 centuries. Every species that has tried has failed. Our technology is 200 years behind our biology is weaker. Our mental capacity is not superior. By every measure of comparison, we will lose." "So we decline," said quietly. All 3 of them looked at her, had a gift for saying important things in a calm voice that made people listen. "We decline," she continued, "and we go home and explain to the world that we were too scared to try. Or we accept and we fail, and at least we show the galaxy that humans are not afraid of impossible odds. They believe we are primitive. Perhaps they need to see something different." Looked at each of them. These 3 people would represent all of humanity in the trial. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. Millions of humans would watch them succeed or fail. The opinion the galaxy formed about humanity would be shaped by what these 4 people did in the coming weeks. "We accept," said. "We go to the Nexus station. We compete. We lose, probably, but we do not show fear. We show that humans have something the galaxy does not yet understand." They made the decision in those few seconds. None of them asked what that something might be. They did not yet know. The journey to Nexus Station took 3 weeks. The transport ship was equipped with the best technology Earth could provide, but it was primitive compared to the vessel that was waiting to guide them through the outer regions of known space. Watched the display screens as their ship passed through regions of space filled with stations and ships belonging to 100 different species. Humans had been to the stars for only 30 years. The galaxy had been crowded with advanced civilizations for millions of years. During the journey, the 4 of them prepared. Lisa studied the previous trials, analyzing the patterns of how species failed. Daniel worked with combat simulations, trying to understand what kind of physical and mental challenges they would face. Organized their equipment and their plans for keeping the team healthy and safe. Did something different. He read human history. He read about humans climbing mountains knowing they might fall. He read about humans crossing oceans in tiny ships knowing the water could kill them. He read about humans in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands, surviving because they refused to accept that survival was impossible. He read about humans choosing to die rather than betray their friends. He read about humans making jokes in the middle of battles. He read about humans helping strangers even when it cost them everything. 3 weeks of reading history, and began to understand something about his species that the would never comprehend. They were strong, they lived for centuries and had mastered technology that looked like magic to human eyes. But they had come from a world that was gentle and easy. They had never known real struggle. They had never faced a day where the choice was between victory and death. They had never built their civilization on the bones of their own failures. Humans had. The transport landed on Nexus Station at dawn, Earth time. The station was massive, a structure built by the architects millions of years ago, before they had vanished from the galaxy. The architects had left behind only their works. No one knew what they looked like or where they had gone. They left behind weapons and tools and mysteries that advanced civilizations spent centuries trying to understand. They had also left behind the Nexus trial. An official greeted them in the landing bay. There were tall creatures, almost transparent in appearance, with bodies that seemed to glow with an inner light. They had been in the space between the stars so long that they had evolved beyond needing solid ground. They floated above the floor of the landing bay, regarding the humans with expressions that contained no warmth. "You are the humans," they said. It was not a question. "We are," replied, stepping forward. "I am Commander Williams. This is Dr. Lisa Bradford, Officer Daniel Pierce, and Nurse Hayes. We represent the human species and Earth." They made a sound that might have been a sigh. "You will not survive the first stage. Your biology is inadequate. Your mind is inadequate. You will die here, and your species will know that they were not ready for the galaxy. This is not judgment. It is simply truth." Did not argue. He had expected nothing different. "When do we begin?" he asked. They indicated a corridor. "When you are ready." First chamber was designed to kill quickly. A vertical shaft rose up for what looked like 100 meters, filled with platforms that appeared and disappeared at random intervals. Between the platforms, energy barriers crackled with power that would burn through any living tissue in seconds. They floated above them in the observation area, their translucent bodies glowing with what might have been amusement. "The rules are simple," the official said. "Reach the top, do not fall, do not touch the barriers. The sequence changes every 10 seconds. You must adapt or die." Stepped forward into the chamber. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was calm. Fear was something that all soldiers learned to use. Fear meant your body was ready to act. Fear was not weakness. It was your body preparing for survival. The first platform was solid beneath his feet. The second platform was 3 meters above him and 2 meters to the left. The energy barrier between them was active, crackling with red light. Watched it for 5 seconds. The barrier pulsed. Every pulse lasted 2 seconds with a half-second gap where it shut off. He counted the pattern, 3 pulses of red light, then a half-second darkness. Then it repeated. Timed his jump to the darkness. He leaped upward, his muscles burning with effort. He landed hard on the second platform, gasping, 1 meter up, 99 more to go. Below him was watching the barriers. She had been a nurse for 20 years, and in that time she had learned that the human body had patterns just like everything else. The heart beat in a rhythm. The breath moved in patterns. Pain moved in waves. If you understood the pattern, you could work within it instead of against it. The barriers were the same. They had a rhythm. Closed her eyes and felt the rhythm instead of watching it. Then she moved. Her body seemed to know when to jump without her mind telling it. She moved like a dancer through the energy beams, landing on platforms beside with grace that surprised even him. Daniel was doing something different. He was mapping the chamber in his head. Every platform that appeared, he noted its location. Every barrier, he tracked its position and timing. By the time he joined and on the 5th platform, he had the pattern mapped out in his mind. Not all of it, but enough to see the way forward. "There," he said, pointing to a pathway through the barriers that seemed random, but was actually following a mathematical sequence. The platforms follow a spiral pattern. The barriers follow that same spiral, but inverted. If we move in the spiral pattern, the barriers stay synchronized with our movement. We will hit them if we try to jump between them, but we will not hit them if we follow the spiral. Did not ask how Daniel knew this. Daniel had been studying tactical patterns his entire life. His mind naturally saw the mathematics in chaos. They climbed together, following the spiral pattern that Daniel had identified. The barriers pulsed and crackled around them, but they never touched human flesh. They moved through the chaos with increasing confidence. 6 platforms, then 10, then 20. The observers seemed confused. They had expected the humans to panic, to freeze, to fall. Instead, the humans were moving with purpose, with coordination, with an understanding of the barrier patterns that should not have been possible without studying the chamber for hours. The humans reached the top platform in 6 minutes. The chamber opened below them, and a new space appeared. The barrier chamber faded, and they stood in a circular room with 3 large mechanical devices positioned at equal distances from each other. Each device was covered in switches, levers, and spinning wheels. On the far wall, a series of locks remained sealed. The official spoke again through speakers in the wall. "This is the chamber of 3 locks. Each lock requires the solution to 3 simultaneous mathematical problems. The problems are connected. Solve one and the others become more difficult. Solve all 3 at the same time and the locks open. Every other species has failed at this stage. Either they solve one problem and get trapped, or they cannot solve any of the problems because the complexity is too high. You have 1 hour. Lisa moved immediately to the first device. Her hands moved across the switches and levers, testing them, feeling how they responded. The device was not just mechanical. It had sensors that responded to pressure, temperature, and movement patterns. It was designed to teach the solver that mechanical problems were not always purely mathematical. The second device was different. It had spinning wheels with numbers on them, arranged in patterns that looked random but responded to touch. When Lisa reached out and touched one wheel, the others spun in response. She realized that the device was teaching that all 3 problems were connected by touch, not by calculation alone. The third device was the strangest. It had no obvious controls. It was a smooth metal box with 1 button in the center. Lisa pressed it and nothing happened. She pressed it again, nothing. She realized that this device was teaching timing. It was not about pressing the button. It was about when you press the button. "Come here," Lisa called to Daniel. Daniel came and looked at the 3 devices. He studied them for 2 minutes without touching anything. Then he began to move through them with a strange kind of dance. He would move one lever on the first device, then run to the second device and spin a wheel, then sprint to the third device and press the button at a specific moment in the sequence. The wheels on the devices started to synchronize. The levers began moving in coordination. The button on the third device began responding to the pattern Daniel had created. Watched, she understood something that neither Lisa nor Daniel had fully grasped yet. The devices were not working against each other. They were working together. Each movement on one device affected the others because they were all connected by a system underneath. If you tried to solve them separately, you would fail. They had to be solved as a unified whole. "Stop," he said. Daniel stopped mid-motion. Lisa looked up from the first device. "We are working against each other," said. "We each took one device and tried to solve it separately, but the devices are connected. We have to think about them as one problem, not 3 problems." Came over and looked at all 3 devices together. He saw what meant. The first device controlled pressure. The second device controlled rotation. The third device controlled timing. If pressure, rotation, and timing were all working together, the locks would open. Together, all 4 of them moved through the chamber in perfect coordination. One person maintained pressure on the first device, while another controlled the rotation of the second. Managed the timing on the third device while watched the locks on the wall, calling out which one was getting closer to opening. The first lock clicked open, then the second, then the third. The far wall slid open, revealing a corridor leading deeper into the station. The observers were silent. In 300 years, no species had solved the chamber of 3 locks this quickly. Most species got trapped in the second stage, unable to move forward or backward. These humans had solved it in less than 15 minutes. The official's voice came through the speakers, and for the first time it did not sound confident. "You may continue to the 3rd trial, but know this, humans. The trials become more difficult from this point. What you have accomplished means nothing if you die in the stages that the 3rd trial was a chamber of extremes. When the humans entered, the temperature dropped so fast that their breath froze in the air. Ice formed on the walls, and the ground beneath their feet became slick and dangerous. Then, without warning, the temperature spiked upward. The ice melted into streams of boiling water. The walls became hot enough to burn skin if touched directly. The chamber cycled between extremes every 3 minutes. Freeze to death or burn to death. There seemed to be no way to survive both conditions. The voice echoed through the chamber. "In the center of the chamber is a locked door. On the door are 12 symbols. To open the door, you must place your hand on each symbol in the correct sequence. The symbols represent numbers and operations that solve a mathematical equation. The equation changes as the temperature changes. Solve the equation to progress. Fail to solve it, and you will perish from the temperature before you can open the door. Many species have tried. None have succeeded. Looked at his team. The cold was already making his joints stiff. He could feel the pain in his shoulders and knees that came from age and years of hard service in space. His body was not made for these extremes. Human bodies were made for the narrow band of temperatures on Earth. They were not designed for this. But humans had lived in deserts and mountains and poles. Humans had survived in caves without sunlight and in jungles thick with heat and moisture. Humans had learned to endure what their bodies complained about. "We need to map the equations," Lisa said. Her teeth were chattering. "The temperature is the variable. As temperature changes, the equation changes. If we can understand how the equation transforms with temperature, we can solve it before it changes again." "How much time do we have?" Daniel asked. 3 minutes before the next temperature change," replied, checking his watch. Lisa ran to the center of the chamber where the 12 symbols waited. Her hands were shaking from the cold, but her mind was focused. She looked at the symbols and saw a pattern. The first symbol was a number. The second was an operation. The third was a number. The pattern repeated. It was a mathematical sequence built into the symbols themselves. She called out the sequence to Daniel. 19 multiply 4 add 32 divide 8 subtract 15 multiply 2 add 10. Daniel was calculating in his head, moving through the math quickly. "That does not equal a whole number," he said. "There is a variable missing." Lisa realized what the variable was: the temperature. The equation needed the current temperature to solve correctly. As the chamber heated, the equation would change because the temperature number would change. She turned to, "The temperature is the key. We need to adjust our answer based on the temperature of the chamber at the moment we solve it." Was holding a small device they had brought from the ship. It measured temperature. She called out the readings. -40 degrees and dropping. It will reach -60 in 90 seconds. Lisa started pressing the symbols in sequence. Her fingers moved across them with increasing speed. The chamber was so cold now that her hands were becoming numb. The pain was intense. Every nerve in her body was screaming at her to stop, to quit, to give up. But Lisa had not become a scientist by giving up when things became difficult. She pressed the final symbol. The equations shifted. The temperature started climbing. Lisa had solved the first equation, but there were more to come. As the heat built, new symbols would appear and new equations would need solving. The chamber cycled upward. Now the danger was overheating. Sweat poured down their faces. The walls radiated so much heat that they had to move away from them or risk serious burns. Daniel was breathing hard, his military training allowing him to manage the oxygen flow in his lungs despite the heat. Was holding back pain in his chest and shoulders. The extreme cold followed by extreme heat was testing his older body in ways he had not expected, but he did not mention it. Leaders did not complain. Leaders endured. Was moving between them, checking their vital signs, watching for signs of heat stroke or hypothermia. She had medical training that the other species did not have. They had doctors among their ranks, but was something different. She was trained to keep humans alive in the worst possible conditions. She knew what to do when the body was pushed to its limits. The second equation appeared as the temperature reached its peak. Lisa solved it again, her mind pushing through the exhaustion and pain. The temperature started dropping once more. The third equation came during the return to cold. Then the fourth during the heating. By the fifth cycle, realized something. The equations were not random. They were following a pattern based on the temperature cycles. The numbers changed, but the structure remained the same. If you understood the structure, you could predict what came next. He pulled Lisa aside during the sixth cycle. As they stood in moderate cold that was almost comfortable compared to what had come before. The pattern said, "The equations are built on a rhythm, like music. The temperature goes up, it comes down. The equation structure stays the same. If we understand the rhythm of the chamber, we can solve the equations before they change." Lisa's eyes widened. She had been thinking about the equations as mathematical problems. She had not thought about them as a rhythmic pattern, but was right. Everything had rhythm. Everything had a pattern if you looked at it the right way. The 7 remaining equations became easier. Not easy, but possible, because Lisa was no longer fighting the chamber. She was moving with the chamber, understanding its cycle, working in harmony with the temperature changes instead of against them. By the seventh equation, Daniel had figured out the pattern well enough to help Lisa. By the ninth, could predict what the next equation would be based on the pattern of previous ones. The 12th equation was solved in the cold of the deep cycle. As Lisa pressed the final symbol, the locked door slid open. They stumbled through the doorway into a new chamber, one that maintained a comfortable temperature. The relief was so intense that all four of them collapsed to the floor, their bodies shaking with exhaustion. They had survived the extremes. They had succeeded where other species had failed. Daniel sat up after a few minutes and started laughing. It was not a laugh of joy, but of exhaustion and disbelief. "We just survived the temperature chamber," he said. "We actually survived it." "One more to come before the final trial," said. His voice was hoarse from breathing hard through the temperature extremes. "The fourth trial is called the Chamber of Choice. It is supposed to be the hardest of all." "Why is choosing hard?" asked. Did not answer immediately. He had read the notes about the Chamber of Choice. Every species that had entered it had faced a choice between personal survival and team survival. Most species had chosen to survive individually. Those individuals had then died in the final trial because they had no team to help them. They had designed the trial to split species apart, to force each individual into isolation. For humans, choosing to abandon your team was not a strength. It was a weakness that would kill you. The Chamber of Choice was different from all the others. It was beautiful in a way that made suspicious. The walls were not stone or metal. They seemed to be made of light itself, soft and gentle. The floor was warm and comfortable. There was no obvious danger, no immediate threat. In the center of the chamber, 4 doors appeared. They were identical in every way, arranged in a circle. Behind each door, a voice could be heard. The voices were not threatening. They were gentle, almost kind. The official's voice came through the chamber's speakers. "You have entered the Chamber of Choice. Behind each door is a path to safety. You must each choose a door. Choose correctly, and that person will advance to the final trial. Choose incorrectly, and you will not advance. However, one of the 4 paths does not lead to survival. It leads to death. One person must choose the path of death so the others may live. If all 4 of you try to avoid the death path, all 4 of you will die. You have 10 minutes to decide who will sacrifice themselves so the others may continue." The voices behind each door grew louder. Each voice was calling to one of them by name, offering promises, offering comfort, offering safety. The voice behind the first door called to, telling him he was a hero, that he had already proven himself, that he deserved to live. The second voice called to Lisa, telling her that the galaxy needed her scientific mind, that she was too valuable to lose. The third voice called to Daniel, telling him that warriors belonged in the final battle, not dead in a chamber of choice. The fourth voice called to, telling her that healers were rare and precious, that she should not waste her life. None of them moved toward the doors. Studied the chamber. It was designed to exploit fear and selfishness. It was designed to force difficult choices. But it was also designed with an assumption. The assumption was that each individual would prioritize their own survival above all else. Every species tested so far had operated under this assumption. They had divided into teams where each member tried to ensure they survived. But humans had also evolved on a planet where survival often meant working together, where individual strength meant nothing if you faced something larger and more powerful alone. "We are not choosing," said loudly. "All 4 of us will refuse the doors. We will find another way." "That is not how the chamber works," the voice replied. "You must choose. The doors are the only way forward." "Then we die together," said simply. "We came as a team. We survived every trial as a team. We will face this as a team." Lisa looked at the doors and realized something. "Wait," she said. "The chamber said one door leads to death, but it did not say the others lead to victory. The other 3 doors might also lead to failure. The chamber is assuming we think in terms of individual survival, but if we refuse the choice, if we reject the chamber's logic, maybe the chamber itself will fail." Daniel understood. The architects built this chamber. They wanted to test whether a species would value loyalty above survival. Every species has been thinking about which door is safe. Maybe the test is not about finding the safe door. Maybe the test is about refusing to choose at all. They stood together in the center of the chamber. The voices behind the doors grew more insistent, more urgent, more desperate. They offered pleasures and honors and promises of glory. They begged the humans to choose to take the safety being offered to live. But the 4 humans did not move. 10 seconds before the time limit, something changed. The chamber's lights flickered. The beautiful walls lost their soft glow. The doors began to fade, becoming transparent, then invisible. And behind where the doors had been, a new path appeared. A pathway that led deeper into the station. A path that opened only when all 4 of them refused to abandon each other. The observers in the control room were shocked. In 300 years, no species had ever refused the chamber of choice. They had sent thousands of competitors through that chamber, and every single one had made the choice. Each individual had selected a door, and each individual had hoped they had chosen correctly. Most had chosen the death path. The few who had chosen the safe paths had then died in the final trial because they no longer had their teams to support them. But the humans had not played the game. They had rejected the game's rules entirely. The official spoke, and for the first time, anger was present in its voice. You have passed the chamber of choice, but your success changes nothing. You will die in the final trial. All species die in the final trial. It is the architect's choice, the ultimate test. Thousands of individuals have attempted it. None have survived. You will be no different. Led his team through the new pathway. They were exhausted. Every part of their bodies ached from the extreme temperatures and the constant stress of the trials. But they had something none of the previous competitors had possessed. They had each other. The final trial chamber was vast. It was a massive room that seemed to have no walls or ceiling, just an endless space filled with obstacle after obstacle. There were gaps that required perfect jumps to cross. There were barriers that required strength to push through. There were puzzles that required intelligence to solve. There were platforms that crumbled beneath weight and required balance to traverse. And there was a final obstacle, a massive energy vortex that cycled with incredible power, a thing of pure destruction that seemed to contain the force of a dying star. You must reach the vortex and pass through it, the voice said. No species has ever passed through the vortex. They have died trying, but the chamber demands that you try. The vortex cycles between every few seconds. There is a brief window where it is dormant. You must pass through in that window. Fail and you die. Lisa, Daniel, and looked at the final chamber. They looked at each other. There was no need to discuss strategy. They knew what to do. They moved as a unit through the obstacles, each person supporting the others, each person using their unique strengths to help the team progress. Daniel used his tactical mind to find the safest path through the gap section. Lisa calculated the angles of the falling platforms and found the rhythm. Kept them moving, kept them focused, kept them working as one unit instead of 4 separate individuals. They reached the vortex. The energy was immense and terrifying. It pulsed with power that made the very air around them vibrate. Watched the cycle. 7 seconds of full power, 3 seconds of dormancy. A brief window where a team that moved together might pass through. Hold hands, commanded. All 4 of them joined hands in a circle. They became one unit, one organism, one team bound by more than just physical contact. The vortex cycled. The power dropped. In the 3-second window, they ran forward together, holding hands, moving as a single entity. The vortex touched them, and for a moment they felt the raw power of the architects, the force that had built the galaxies and shaped the stars. It burned and froze and twisted all at the same time. But it did not kill them. They were 4 humans, a team, a unit, moving through the impossible with nothing but each other to sustain them. Beyond the archway, the humans found a chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were lined with symbols that glowed with soft light. At the center of the chamber, a massive device stood, covered in controls and screens. It was ancient, but it was still functioning. It was still awake after millions of years. The official's voice had changed. It was no longer confident or patronizing. It was uncertain, confused, filled with something that might have been fear. You have reached the archive, the voice said. No species has reached this place in 300 years. The archive contains the records of the architects. You are the first to be allowed to see this knowledge. A screen on the device flickered to life, displaying text in a language that the humans did not understand. But their ship had sophisticated translation software. Within seconds, the message began to translate into English. The message was simple and direct. If you are reading this, you have won the trial. You have proven yourself worthy. The trial was not a test of power or intelligence or physical strength. It was a test of character. It was a test of the values you hold. The architects created this trial millions of years ago before we left this galaxy. We created it for a species that would someday arise, a species that would inherit our knowledge and our responsibility to protect this galaxy. Lisa read the message aloud, her voice shaking with emotion and exhaustion. The message continued. The species that win this trial must possess certain qualities. They must be able to adapt to impossible circumstances. They must be resilient when facing hardship. They must use intelligence and science to solve problems. They must be capable of moral choice, of choosing what is right over what is easy. And most importantly, they must value loyalty to their team above personal survival. They must be willing to die for those they trust. The screen went dark for a moment. Then new text appeared. You have shown all these qualities. You have passed the trial. The galaxy is now yours to protect. Use the knowledge within this archive wisely. When the humans emerged from the archive, the control room was in chaos. They were arguing. The Vex were shocked into silence. Other species were discussing what this meant, what it meant that humanity had won, what it meant that a young species from a backwards world had achieved what no other civilization had managed. A leader older than the official who had greeted them approached directly. Your species, they said, is not the most powerful. You are not the most intelligent. You are not the most advanced. How did you succeed when thousands of species before you failed? Thought about this question carefully. He thought about the journey they had taken, from the impossible first chamber to the final vortex that nearly killed them all. He thought about Lisa's brilliant mind that had seen patterns in chaos. He thought about Daniel's tactical genius that had found pathways through impossible obstacles. He thought about quiet strength that had held them together when they wanted to break apart. We succeeded, said slowly, because we came from a world that tried to kill us every day. We come from a place where survival required working together. We come from a species that has learned through millions of years of struggle that we are stronger together than we are alone. The trials tested all the things your species values, but they also tested the things only a species would have learned. They tested loyalty. They tested compassion. They tested the willingness to die for someone else. We have these things because we had to learn them to survive. The official said nothing. It was a reply they had not expected. They had dominated the galaxy through technology and intelligence and power. They had assumed these were the qualities that mattered most. They had never considered that strength came from a place of survival in harsh conditions, from learning to value others above yourself, from becoming tough through real struggle rather than merely through evolution. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had won the trial. A young species, barely 30 years into space exploration, had beaten every advanced civilization in known space. It was impossible. It was incredible. It was real. Orders came from Earth immediately. Was offered a position on the Galactic Council. They wanted him to represent humanity. He could have accepted. He could have taken the honor and the power that came with it. Instead, he refused. I appreciate the honor, told the Council. But humanity is not represented by one person. We should not join the Council as subordinates or as struggling new species trying to prove ourselves. We should join as equals, as a species that has something unique to offer. Let me return to Earth and bring back representatives who understand that humanity's strength is not in individual achievement. It is in collective responsibility. We should send scientists and soldiers and healers and teachers, all working together, all contributing equally. The Council agreed. It was a strange request, but they could not deny a species that had won the architect's trial. And his team returned to Earth as heroes, but not in the way they had expected. They did not return as victors who had conquered the galaxy. They returned as ambassadors of a truth about humanity that the galaxy had not yet understood. They returned as proof that a species did not need to be the oldest or the most advanced to have something valuable to contribute. Within months, other advanced species began studying human history and human culture more carefully. They read about humans climbing mountains and crossing deserts and surviving in jungles. They read about humans inventing music and art and literature even in the middle of wars. They read about humans making jokes in the face of death, humans helping strangers when it would have been safer to help only themselves, humans building civilizations on foundations of cooperation rather than domination. And they began to understand something fundamental. The architects had not built the trial to test the most powerful species. They had built it to test the most wise. The most wise species was not the one with the most technology. It was the species that had learned through struggle how to treat each other with respect, how to work together for common goals, how to choose their team over their own safety. Humanity possessed these qualities not because they were innately superior, but because they had been forged on a harsh world that demanded these qualities for survival. In a small park on Earth, a young human child played, unaware of the galaxy that now watched humanity with new respect. The child was building something with other children, working together without any adult supervision. They argued sometimes. They helped each other sometimes. They failed and tried again. It was a small thing, ordinary and insignificant. But in that moment, watching a group of young humans work together despite their differences and their individual goals, the galaxy finally understood what the architects had known millions of years ago. Humanity would be all right, not because they were the strongest but because they had learned the most important lesson of all. They had learned to see each other's value. They had learned to believe that together they could face anything. They had learned that the real treasure in the universe was not power or knowledge or technology. It was loyalty, it was trust, it was the willingness to choose your team over yourself. And that made humanity, in the end, the true winners of the Nexus trial. They passed through. They fell onto stone ground on the other side. Above them, a massive archway stood, and beyond it, light. The vortex released them, as if recognizing that they had done something no other species had managed. They had not just survived the final trial, they had passed the final judgment. They had won. Die alone. Lisa, Daniel, and looked at each other. None of them needed to discuss what would happen. They already knew. Whatever the Chamber of Choice demanded, they would choose each other. That was what humans did. W looked at his team. Their faces were flushed with effort, but their eyes were bright. They had proven something to themselves. They had proven they were capable of more than the galaxy believed. "Let's go," said simply. They walked through the corridor toward the third trial, toward challenges that had broken species far more advanced than humanity. But as they walked, none of them felt fear. They felt something else. They felt like a team that had already beaten impossible odds. They felt ready to face whatever came next. Looked back at Lisa, Daniel, and they nodded. They had come to compete. Failure was certain, but they would fail moving forward, not running backward. They walked toward the first trial,